Tonight we have who I would call a regular to the show. He's an author of 8 books. You may have seen him on Ancient Aliens. He's done numerous radio interviews, including ours. He resides in Peru, normally, and he's talking to us about, tonight, the Gosford Glyphs, some upcoming tours that he's doing, and plus we're going to find out more about the DNA testing, right, which we've heard is getting much closer. Please welcome Brien Foerster.
Great to be with you, David and Mickey. How are you?
Excellent, sir. Excellent. Thank you for being with us. It's an honor yet again. Thank you.
You know, I recently saw the photos of you, Brien, at the Gosford Glyphs, and I couldn't believe it when I saw them, because they're not far from me. It's like 10 minutes away from where I live. I couldn't believe that you'd made it all the way here, and yet you were so far away. Could you tell everyone what are the Gosford Glyphs?
The Gosford Glyphs seem to be Egyptian hieroglyphics. As if people don't know where Gosford is, I believe it's just north of Sydney, and we were taken there by a group of Australian friends, and I was very impressed with what I saw. It was much more impressive than what any photograph can show you.
It's unusual, isn't it? Mickey and I went there on a field trip ourselves, and we were shown by a local guide of ours. And one thing that struck us was there was a mixture of the original glyphs and then what I would say, I know vandals have made their own ones, but what's your impression of the oldest ones?
Well, the most important thing is that they're not easy to find. Like, they're not simply on the side of the highway. We had to trek in through the bush for quite a while, and then there's a narrow passage you go into and turn left. Then these glyphs are on both 2 walls with a partial series of stone slabs above them. So I was, I was quite in shock when I first saw them. They've also been decoded by 2 Egyptian hieroglyphic experts, Yusuf Awiyan and Mohammed Ibrahim, and they clearly believe that they are late dynastic Egyptian, probably from around the 5th century BC.
Do you think all the glyphs are in fact authentic, or are there some that were made by maybe vandals or latecomers?
Well, the 2 main walls, the erosion of the glyphs is all quite consistent. And I can't believe, it's quite hard sandstone that they're carved into. So I can't really believe that they could be like 30, 50, or 100 years old, because there's just too much erosion. They're not carved sharply into the stone. There's almost some rounding off that occurs, which means that there would have been a fair amount of water erosion happening after they were created. And so, since I look at ancient stuff, ancient stone surfaces all the time, and they definitely look old to me. I'm not sure how old, but the idea that they were done by vandals or college students or whatever, I don't believe at all. But they are very controversial in that they would show an Egyptian presence from more than 2,000 years ago on the east coast of Australia.
Yeah, and that of course flies in the face of I guess accepted history and archaeology, which is what we do all here, right? That's what we do. That's our business. But you're right, and Dave and I, we saw it ourselves, and we can attest to this, to the weathering you've just described. We were blown away as well, and you're right. It's not easy to get to. It was in fact quite hard, and you had to get through all the nature there. But we would like, if you come back to Australia, I know Dave has spoken to you about this as well, we'd like to take you to Devil's Rock, which is another Aboriginal site which has a carved spaceman, believe it or not, which there's a whole legend around this as well, Aboriginal mythology, and then you can actually see another mountain from Devil's Rock, which is shaped almost like a step pyramid, but we'd love to take you there and just see what you think about it.
Well, that would be excellent, because we are planning on returning in 2017.
Brilliant.
We only
Well, we only saw Melbourne and Sydney. We didn't get Australia is it's almost the size of Canada, where I'm from. So there's so much that yet to explore, and the Australian people are amongst the most wonderful on the planet. So we loved our time there, but would love to come and spend 2 weeks or a month to really have a look.
That'd be great. And look, we'd love to take you around, definitely, and maybe take you to some other mystery sites, your time permitting, of course.
Sure.
But Dave mentioned something about some tours you've got coming up as well, unless you wanted to talk more about the Gosford Glyphs, Dave.
Oh, I had another question. Because you're right. Yusuf and the other researcher, they deciphered the glyphs, but what we haven't mentioned is, what did they say?
Right.
What do the glyphs say?
Well, the simple story, and both Yusuf and Mohammed are experts on hieroglyphics. And what most people don't understand is that hieroglyphics were not consistent and standard from the first dynasties to the last dynasties. Like any language, it evolves over time. So they were able to figure out, based on the style, that it's probably late dynastic, around the 5th century BC. And the basic story is that there was a trading system going on between Australia and Egypt, likely involving gold, because the question is, where did all of Egypt's gold come from? Australia produces a lot of gold. And that one of the two leaders of this group was killed probably by a snake bite. So the other one decided to bury him on site. There is evidence of a chamber there that could be the burial place, and that he carved, based on his limited knowledge of the hieroglyphics, because he wasn't a scribe, but he basically wrote a eulogy and a story of what their adventure and purpose was of being in Australia.
It's a tale of woe, but also this mystery around the trade and the excavation of gold. They do mention, a lot of wealth, and the local story here. And I'll give you something that connects it, binds it all together, whether or not you're familiar with this or not. That
it's about the native peoples and part of their language, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, that's right. There's a connection to the native Australian language. Now, killed by a snake, well, that's very believable.
Yes.
You live in Australia. It's surprising you can get to middle aged because there's so many things it's fraught with danger. I don't know how anyone could live barefoot here, and and I live in the bush. So one of the things that gets me is the suburb that is directly north of the one that the glyphs are in is called Narara, and it actually means black snake. It's an Aboriginal word for black snake. But there's a couple of words, and the Aboriginal language includes compound words, and one of those, Rakumba, is an Aboriginal word meaning the sun. And that's the local word for it, but it has the word Ra in it. But Kumba is completely different, and it means black fruit tree. However, the dialects are very localized, and in other very the children would go on walkabouts and meet other tribes in other areas and cross boundaries, and it proliferated slightly out to become Nura, which still has an RA in it, for sun, and Warami has an RA in it, and that means Sunday. And so when they had to use the word sun, they included the two letters of Ra, which I think is an extraordinary likeness to the sun god Ra, and how the Egyptian contact affected their language. It really, to me, that really tells me a lot more about that and leads a lot more credence towards their having any influence at all. You would imagine there'd be an influence if you have a trading partner or visitors that are here either just once live their entire lives here, or or frequent.
I wonder if there are more loan words from the Egyptian. That's going to be a show for us. We're going to investigate this. We're definitely going to do that.
The Aboriginal language is quite an isolated, pocketed language with thousands of different languages, all with say that the word kangaroo, for instance, is different everywhere. It's not a universal name for the same creature that exists, and I thought that was extraordinary when I started doing research into it. So I thought I'd share something with you. And I climbed down into that burial chamber.
Oh, wow.
I climbed down. There's a photo up right now, and it's square-sided, square-roofed. And I took photos and showed them, and I think it was covered up by the local council, and it's been recently unearthed again. So I found that the whole glyphs thing, we would happen to just randomly stumble upon it. There wasn't. You've been there, and it's not something that's out in the open. It's not on a cliff wall which overlooks the water or anything. It's something that you have to you climb under a big rock and you come up between two rocks, and So when Mekki and I went there, I was quite surprised to see that it was so difficult to locate.
Well, that's a very good point, because anybody who would want to fake it would obviously want it to be seen. And since there's no way to find it unless a local person takes you there, that adds to the authenticity. Also, the fact that there are huge slabs, some of them still on top of where the two walls are, means that originally, if it was intact, that would have covered the walls from erosion for a long period of time. When the damage to the roof happened, I don't know.
Also, Mekki and I went up. I don't know if you had the opportunity, but if you climb up on top of those and up on to the hill just above it, there are star maps drawn out, and they're circular depressions that have been carved into the rocks as a star map, and that's a sacred Aboriginal site up there. So that would also lend itself towards this mystery, because they were the other brother. They tried to save the brother. The local Aboriginals assisted, and they were there, and that was their sacred site. So it stands to reason that they would have buried their dead brother there.
Well, that's true, and also, of course, from the high point you look out and you see a huge protected bay, which is what any navigating people would want to have in order to have a seaport. You're not going to just park your ship in the open ocean. If you can bring it into a protected harbor like that, it's perfect for being able to access deep into the country of Australia for all sorts of things to take back with you to Australia, to Egypt, including boomerangs, which of course until recently were hanging in the Cairo Museum.
Oh, right. I didn't even know that. Wow. Okay.
There was a large collection of them in the Tutankhamun display, and because of the controversial nature, they've been taken down and hidden, which is typical.
Yeah.
But rather than it being that the Egyptians invented the boomerang alongside, it makes more sense that a navigating people going to their homeland would take curiosities like that back with them.
Absolutely. And it's such an unusual weapon, to come up with in the first place. But I really do want you to speak about the tours that you have upcoming as well. And maybe if we have the time, talk a bit about the DNA testing for the skulls as well, because clearly I'm hanging on that.
Yeah. Well, we have, my wife and I don't, really run a tour business, but we love conducting tours in order to bring people from around the world to different places that we like to explore. So in February, we're doing a tour with a company called Megalithomania in England with Hugh Newman, and we're going to be exploring Aztec, Toltec, Maya, and Olmec sites. Some of the Olmec places may actually be megalithic, and the Olmecs had at least their royalty had elongated skulls, which ties them into Peru. Then in April, it's our 4th annual techno-spiritual tour of Egypt, where again, with experts like Yusuf Awiyan, we're looking at obvious machining technology from thousands of years ago. After that, we're going to be going to Baalbek in Lebanon, where the largest cut stones in the world are.
Yeah.
And after that, we're going to Petra in Jordan, which is supposedly much bigger than what most people imagine. Most people have seen what's called the treasury that was in one of the Indiana Jones films, but people we know who have been there to say it goes on and on. Then in May, we're doing a tour of Turkey with Andrew Collins and Hugh Newman. And in July, we have our major Bolivia, Peru ancient technology tour.
Well, are you going to Göbekli Tepe, of course, I imagine, or?
Oh yes, yeah. In May we'll be going to Göbekli Tepe, definitely, and many other sites. Turkey is one of the most fascinating countries in the world. If you're interested in ancient megalithic stuff, it's not as high on the map or popularity like as Egypt or Peru is, but people keep sending me photographs from Turkey of things I've never seen before and show incredible antiquity.
Yeah, look, I'm actually half Turkish, believe it or not. So, you're absolutely 100% correct. And in fact, there are these really strange tracks in the rock that look like tank tracks, if you will. You probably have seen those, and I have no explanation for those at all. I mean, they truly look like tracks a truck or a tank would have made while it was mud. And now it's stone.
Right.
So, but there's more. There's much more. I mean, Istanbul itself is thousands of years old as well, of course. But you'll have a fantastic time, I think.
Well, I'm sure it won't be the only time we go to Turkey. It's again the number of sites that I've seen photographs of that are just astonishing. And Turkey deserves much more attention in terms of research and also tourism to look at this stuff. It's a seemingly underestimated country, and it has incredible potential for phenomenal discoveries. Not simply, Göbekli Tepe, of course, but much, much more. A truly mysterious country, and I can't wait to visit and have the food.
Yes,
Of course.
no, that's good. If you need any help with anything, you let me know. I still got family there.
No, thank you.
Sure.
I like the food that's cooked on the swords.
Yes. Absolutely.
To be honest.
But Brien, the DNA testing, it is getting much closer, we believe, as well. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. It's been a very frustrating process of 4 years so far. We've been told conflicting stories as to what we have to do in order to properly do this. It would take a long time to tell you the story. And the number of labs and geneticists we've been through, mainly because they wanted to try to possess the results, which is not acceptable. The results belong to the population of the world, not to some specific lab. But we're actually in contact now with major European and American laboratories. We have one of the most prominent archaeologists in Peru who is in charge of this project now. The director of a major museum is fully backing us. We have 2 different collections of skulls that we're going to be able to test. We have a lab technician that will come down from North America to do the actual testing. We have all the financing in place.
Oh, tremendous.
Etc. So we're actually, even today, I'm in discussions with different laboratories and processes to make sure that this is done in a very proper manner, because there are only perhaps 10 laboratories in the world that can properly do ancient DNA analysis. It's not just a lab that does blood samples for a living person. When you have 2,000-year-old DNA, it's so badly broken down that the computer program has to be able to recombine it to give you an idea of what's going on. But I'm very, very happy that we're this far along, and we put in so much effort that there is no way we're going to stop. We're going to make sure this process happens and then expands to include other mysterious remains from different parts of the world.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm reminded, of course, of Lloyd Pye, whom we had the good fortune to speak to before he passed. and he had tremendous difficulties getting the same kind of work done with the skull that he had in his possession. But I'm glad to hear that you're taking those hurdles in stride, sir. That's fantastic.
Well, the unfortunate thing for Lloyd and the fortunate thing for us, Lloyd was actually involved in the early stages of this.
Right.
But I was actually told a couple of days ago that the cost of doing ancient DNA testing has dropped by 90% in the last 3 years.
Wow.
So whereas before it was a multiple $1,000 process per sample, and each sample could be tainted or contaminated or whatever, but you still have to pay for it. So now that the price has dropped by 90%, we'll be able to get a lot done, and we're going to make sure that we study as many samples as possible, as well as the mysterious red hair of the people of this area that is not, which is not Native American in character. So we have one of the major ancient hair researchers on the planet will be given samples of hair to be able to tell us 100% whether or not this is Native American or whether it could be genetic ancestry from another part of the world, which then tells us about migration, other than the so-called Bering Land Bridge theory, which is, a boring idea that everybody in the Americas was populated by walking from Siberia, which is kind of silly.
Yeah. And we've recently seen the date for the, human population in America is being pushed back further and further and further due to recent finds. And it might even tie in with the stories that the Native American tribes have of giants, I imagine. That
exactly.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And it's not unfeasible that there were people, obviously, in the Americas prior to the major migrations of what we call Native Americans. Just as in other parts of the world, historians always try to limit how old a country or a civilization is. They don't take into consideration that there could have been previous civilizations that were possibly destroyed by catastrophe or taken over and their history wiped out, etc. So that's a big field that's opening up now.
Yeah, recently we did a number of shows in an arch of the pre-flood myths, and we touched on every myth from every place around the planet. And in some cases, they talked of giants. There was definitely no connection with the people from pre-flood to post-flood in all of their myths. All the myths themselves said that one or two survived, but then they didn't make it through. Only their offspring made it. They did not make it. So there's something very strange about that, and seeing the what's been revealed now that the glaciers are melting in the high mountains, and that there's discovering there's plant life that was around about 12,500 years ago or something like that at a close date that's been snap frozen, and it could have been that catastrophe, and we're waiting to see further results, and we're keeping our ear to the ground, but it looks very promising, and I'd love to know that these the elongated skulls with the red hair, the Paracas skulls, were indeed an existing, quite separate strain of hominids. That would be tremendous. It would put the icing on the cake for me.
Brien, I would like to ask you a question, sir. And this is a question that Dave and I ponder constantly. We feel that there is a definitive knowledge filter in place which prevents information such as the data you're uncovering, the information that you're uncovering, from entering the mainstream. There's a deliberate effort to keep us in the dark about these discoveries and potential alternative histories, if you will. Do you feel in your researches that you sometimes come up against this as well, like a deliberate effort to derail you?
I would definitely say that there are powers that be that are restricting access, especially if you go to a country like Egypt. The number of places you're not allowed to go, based on no logic whatsoever. Has been a hindrance. Peru and Bolivia not so much, but Egypt is the classic example of somebody simply will lock a door or a gate and no one's allowed in until you give them some baksheesh, some money, and then you can often find the person with the right key to be able to open the door. And so as time goes on, a lot of these places are opening up. We're not really doing anything illegal by doing this. It really depends who has the key, and because we have, high definition camera equipment and the use of the internet, we're able to disseminate information much more rapidly now and bypass a lot of these things. The one thing I can't stand anymore is the concept of peer group, that any evidence has to be brought to some board of directors of academics, and then they either stamp it yes or no. I think it's up to the common sense of the 7 billion people of planet Earth to figure out if whether you're presenting something which makes sense or doesn't, and that's where I stand with it now. It's our history as human beings belongs to all of us, and more people are waking up to this, and it's really accelerating rapidly.
Yes, you're 100% correct, and we hate a science that has grown stale and dogmatic. It's completely contrary to the intent of science, to discover new knowledge, and it's something that we can't abide either. It's a farce, and I'm glad that people like yourself actually physically go to these places, have the means and the intelligence to investigate, and then also the desire to share what they found with the rest of the world. So that is really awesome, and my hat goes off to you.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. It would be pointless for me to try to keep this information to myself because I'm writing a book or something. It's all of this knowledge and these discoveries belong to all of us, and it's nice when someone will buy one of my books to get more information, but it's not my function on this planet to be a historical business person. It's I feel obligated that anything I learn, has to be given out to whoever wants to listen and follow in and conduct their own studies as well, because that's what the tours are great about. If you're able to walk into the deserts of Egypt and see, these astonishing cut surfaces of stone that in some ways are beyond 21st century technology, then we have real mysteries, and because we're able to bring engineers and geologists and other people like that with us, they can corroborate that what we're looking at is not something dynastic people did. Therefore, the question is who did it and when. And again, with your native homeland of Turkey as well, there's so much there that is just crying out, I'm sure, to be expanded on and thoroughly explained.
You're absolutely correct, and it is what you just mentioned, something very, very important, and Dave can back me up on this. It's the detail that people aren't aware of. I'm talking about people in general, the masses out there. Things like right angles inside the sarcophagus, right? Cut into the hardest stone that we know. The perfect alignment of stones, and the stones fit so closely together you can't put a razor blade in it. The Baalbek stones, which weigh 1,000 tons each. Why would you use those stones to build? But people don't know that finer detail. They know, there's something there, because it's just not communicated by the scientific community, and that wonder that would exist otherwise simply doesn't.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And in the past, the limits of our knowledge was based upon the fact that archaeologists were the source of the information. But archaeology is a science of sorts. But you have to approach this from a multidisciplinary way. That's how Robert was able to determine that the Sphinx erosion, at least part of it, was based on water, because he's a water erosion geologist specialist, and through figuring out in terms of the climate of Egypt, that water erosion happened 10,000 years ago or more, long before the dynastic Egyptians ever existed. And this we see in many other countries too. They'll say the Inca built all of this, but then we see that the Inca were capable of a lot of great work, but some things they simply could not have done. that means somebody older was there. You know,
So,
in many places.
in regards to the pre-Inca stonework, and I followed your work for a long time, I was watching a documentary recently, and they mentioned the Moche. Is it Moche or Moshi? How do you pronounce it?
Oh, Moche?
Moche. They attested them to being the brilliant stonemasons pre-Inca, and I still doubt that some of that stonework, as you'd I hope that you would agree, looks as though the stone was made soft like putty rather than being cut and pressed into shape. What's your thoughts? Because I've seen that wall that when if you colour just the right stones, it has animals in it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the precision work that you see, for example, in Egypt in the Serapeum with the 100-ton boxes, or the, aspects of the Great Pyramid, where you see machining technology that's very obvious. In Peru, especially as regards the polygonal walls, you see just illogical approaches to wall construction, where every stone is a different shape and size. Every stone came from the same quarry. You can't fit a human hair in the joints. And the only analogy I have is that they were able to, whoever was doing this work was able to take a stone like granite and make it into the consistency of marshmallow material and almost just squish them together. Even I've had brilliant engineers with us who try to, figure out theoretically how it's done, and they just shake their heads and say, "I have no idea how this was done. We don't have a technology or a technological approach that would even attempt to do this, because it doesn't make sense to the Western mind. Why would you not simply have a uniform size of stone and then build a strong wall that way, rather than making every single stone a different shape and size and three-dimensionally interlocking with one another?" It just doesn't make sense to them whatsoever.
Yeah. Is it true, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard something that these walls are specifically or particularly earthquake proof. So just the way they're configured and the way the stones hang together. I mean, obviously they've stood for a very long time, right, without taking too much damage.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think, though, that the earthquake proofing is a side effect. I don't think that was the intent. I think the actual intent was to get the stone so tight fitting that in some way the building itself would resonate to a specific frequency. I think that was the intent, and by doing that. And that would make, in general, they aren't walls you're looking at. They're actually like courtyards. So you have an interior, and then the exterior is where you see the surfaces. So if you were able to somehow send a frequency that was tuned to that wall, that would make the environment inside the courtyard different than the outside. So this may have been done to enhance mental capabilities or something like that, but the earthquake proofing aspect would be a side benefit to it, because there was a major earthquake in Cusco in 1950, which just made a lot of the even colonial buildings just drop down into rubble. But these megalithic things didn't move whatsoever. They moved as the whole megalithic building or wall would move as if it was one piece of stone.
Wow. That's incredible. But this thing you mentioned around the frequencies and the potential, increase or enhancement of mental faculties, that's fascinating. Because around the world, and as you're probably aware, there are these granite blocks and stones that seem to have been used for that very purpose, right? I mean, we were talking about a global culture here doing this.
Yeah, I think so. And of course, you either have a high quartz content or a high feldspar content, and this is very good for piezoelectric, piezoelectric capability. And whoever was doing this construction, whether it was in Egypt or Peru, Bolivia, and some other places too. They would go whatever distance was required to find the proper stone. So in Peru, we have constructions in Cusco where the quarry is 50 kilometers away. In Egypt, you have structures on the Giza Plateau where the stone was brought from at least Aswan, which is 500 miles. And some of the stone boxes in the Serapeum, again weighing about 100 tons each, it's now theorized that that stone came from Central Africa. So how was that moved?
Wow.
How did they even find it? And how did they transport it there? And of course the obelisks in Egypt as well were clearly not, the original intent of the obelisk was not simply a vertical surface to carve a bunch of hieroglyphics on. They were found by the dynastic Egyptians, and the inscriptions were put on them later because the Egyptians had no idea what the original functions of these things were, but they seem again to be resonance or vibratory in nature.
The same could be said though of the Sphinx. It does, for all intents and purposes, appear as though it was a lion's head, and that Pharaoh has decided that they were going to have their face on it.
Definitely, it's so easy, especially if you're there in person. You can see it well in photographs, but the head itself was originally the only thing that was standing above the surface, because the whole Sphinx itself was carved down into the ground. And so through the course of thousands of years, the body has been reburied many times because the Sphinx is in the Sphinx enclosure. It's easy for the sand to pile up, but the head has always been exposed. And yet the face, aside from the fact that people have shot at it over time, the face is in much finer condition than the back of the head. The back of the head is extremely worn, and the original parts of the body, which were not reconstructed, starting even supposedly in the time of Khufu, are astonishingly weathered.
Actually, that's an excellent point, sir. That's a very, very good point. The weathering of the face doesn't in any way compare to the body, as well as, of course, the complete disproportion of the size of the head to the size of the body. Whereas if you see a stylized representation, it's always in perfect, in perfect unison, in perfect synchronization with the rest of the body. In reality, the head is a lot smaller than, like you would expect from a recarved head, than the body. And Egyptians were sticklers for dimensions and such.
Well, that's true. That's very true. You see the dimensions of the legs, the body, and the tail, and they are very, realistically cat-like, and so it does definitely seem that the head would have been that of a lion, which is very symbolic, and that it eroded over time to the point where probably you couldn't even see what the face, what the facial features of the lion was. And so one pharaoh decided that he wanted either himself or his mother or somebody else carved into the face, because cultures recycle, the older works. You see that all over the planet. Many places that have ancient structures, the foundation is profoundly more, better constructed than the things on top. I just posted on my Facebook page examples of that, where you see Inca work on top of megalithic work, and then Spanish colonial work on top of the Inca work. It's throughout Europe you see that as well. A temple is built on top of an older temple, or a church is built on an older temple. And of course, in a country like Turkey, I'm sure in Istanbul there must be thousands of examples of that. It's such an ancient, strategic place on the planet that,
No, look, that's very, very true. In fact, I'd love to dig there one day. I was curious, sir, if one were to want to do what you do, right, or people like you, being in the midst of it, doing the research, and there are a lot of listeners out there in the world that are young and impressionable, and they want to make a change, in the world as well. How does one go about to do this kind of work? Or I don't want to call it work, because clearly you love it, which means you'll never work a day in your life, so that's good. But so how does one go about? I don't want to say getting into it, but certainly get started in this.
Well, luckily now that we have the internet, YouTube has phenomenal resources about anything like this. I think actually video is better than necessarily reading books, but if you have a part of the planet which is of interest to you, or a mystery of some kind which is of interest to you, I'm sure you can find YouTube videos that will look at this from different points of view. And then once your thirst becomes deeper, then you have to visit these places. It's not enough to see it from secondhand, like from someone else filming it or someone else writing about it. To really understand, you have to see for yourself, and if possible, find local wisdom keepers who may know. It's good, of course, to talk to archaeologists, but in general, archaeologists don't talk with the indigenous people. And the indigenous people often have the actual truth, because archaeology, to a great extent, is about theory. It's my theory about how this was done. But in a city like Cusco, though it was decimated by the Spanish conquest, there are people who still retain knowledge of the Inca and stories of those that were there before the Inca, who may have been responsible for having constructed a megalithic city several thousands of years prior to the Inca ever existing.
Well, you live in a fascinating part of the world, I'll tell you that.
It is.
We've noticed that the ancients seem, like you were talking about, the ancients seem to be able to use stone in a way that just isn't feasible today. You mentioned that the engineers, scratch their heads looking at it today and say, I don't know how it's made. We know the Baalbek stone, the stone quarry, it shows stones that we couldn't move unless we made specialized machinery for it, and we're going on the presumption at the moment with the current history that they didn't have any of that. They had no technology at all, but there you go, you've got a 1,000-ton stone. If they've got a 1,000-ton stone, they had the technology to move it. We just, today, we look at that and say, well, that just doesn't seem logical, because we can't, and we wouldn't move stones that size. Like the wall is made of irregular pieces. Today, we would look at that logically and say, I would make it out of all the same size square blocks. So much easier. The guys down the quarry don't have to get information from us every 5 minutes about a new stone that they've got to cut. Imagine they would hate you for it. So they clearly had a technology then and a method of transporting things that it's beyond our imagination. I can't wait till we get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, well, I think, whoever did this work had a completely different mindset from ours, and that's the problem, is when you take a Western mind and you insist that that the Western mind is the only one that works, and therefore it had to have been done this way, and they always bring up the slaves and the ropes and the wooden rollers. At Baalbek there are 3 stones in place called the Trilithon, which is at the temple itself, and they are 1,200 tons apiece. And then in the quarry, there's one that's 1,500 tons that was never finished. There seems to be a crack in the bottom of it, and that may have been what stopped the work, is that they reached a point and the size they wanted was not properly going to be achieved through that stone, so it may have been abandoned, just like at the quarry in Aswan, the giant 1,200-ton obelisk was never finished because they found a crack partway down it, and for some reason that obelisk had to be very specific dimensions, and once they found the crack, according to the theory, it would never be able to resonate properly for their purposes, and so they didn't stop trying to cut it into pieces. They just said, no, we can't use this one. And then there's also another one that's in the Aswan quarry that I discovered actually when I went underneath it, and it too has a crack in it that's in a place that meant that it could never be of the proper shape and size they wanted. So whoever was doing this work had literally technology beyond our capability and mental processes that are not the way we think, and that's why we have to really leap out of the box and try to, try to figure out who these people, who these people were, and that's why it requires some level of indigenous input, because the people of any land will have some recognition or some memory of what happened in the distant past, because that's the storyline that would have been told to them going down through generations. And I'm offended that archaeologists in general don't listen to indigenous people, because they're missing probably the major points, such as the Aboriginal people of Australia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it does go on. Another bit of proof was that there was a pyramid here in Queensland, Meki.
Oh, in Gympie.
Yeah, the Gympie pyramid, absolutely.
That's right.
And it all seems to tie together. And it's to get to this, to the bottom of all of this. I wonder what it is that they had, what technology they had, and not just the mindset. And I agree with you on the mindset, but the technology, to have the sarcophagus in the king's chamber with a rough outside but a smooth glass-like interior, 90-degree cuts. I just think that's extraordinary. And we've seen evidence that they had drills.
Yeah.
Rotating at much higher speeds than we can achieve today. Otherwise, in fact, the obsidian, they also drilled into obsidian and such tiny little drills that we can't duplicate today.
Well, and to be more clarification on that, the drills or the drill holes we find in Egypt, the drills that were being used were actually not faster, but actually 500 times more efficient than a modern diamond drill. Yeah. So when people say this must have been done with diamonds, we're talking about technology which is beyond diamonds, because you have penetration. A standard household drill will run at I think 3,000 rotations per minute, and some of these drill holes in Egypt, they were able to penetrate seemingly about an inch depth in granite in 10 to 15 rotations.
Wow.
Which is 500 times more efficient than what we can do. Wow.
So not faster, but rather overall better, right? Just better drills. Wow. Okay.
Well, being able to plow into stone, as if it, the common term, as if it was butter, not wood, but butter. I mean, these were. I have no idea what kind of cutter could possibly do that. That is beyond our level of technology, and yet it has to be thousands of years old.
They can tell that because of the scratch mark and the spiraling scratch mark showing the rotation.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course. Wow, yeah. I was when I saw my first drill hole, I was perplexed. I couldn't understand how on earth that would have been possible, and that's because I was the child of the textbook who said that we're the greatest civilization that the planet's ever seen, and and since then we've done this show and Mickey and I've done a lot of research that we've discovered that's just not the case. There must have been another high level technology civilization here before us, and that we're just catching up.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on the show yet again, Brien. A friend of the show. Can I say that?
Of course. No, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and a pleasure to meet you, Mechi.
Thank you.
Or is it Meki or Mechi?
Meki.
Meki.
My actual name is actually Mehmet, but it's very difficult for Anglo-Saxons to pronounce the silent H. So
yes,
it's Meki. Easier.
Okay, great.
So thank you for being on. And look, I promise you, I've actually tried to push some people your way to your website and who are traveling in the area, and they decided to do the touristy thing instead, much to their disappointment. And Meki and I would one day love to get down there. If we can rendezvous down in your hometown, and you show us around some of those the more the sites that you would think that we would enjoy the most. I think that we'd certainly love that, and we'd reciprocate in 2017 when you're here,
Absolutely.
and we're able
Absolutely.
to show you some of the things that are hidden from the people here, from the knowledge.
Okay, great.
So thank you very much, everyone. Brien Foerster, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.